Good evening and a very warm welcome to andBeyond Phinda Private Game Reserve. My name is Damen and welcome to our fireside chat for this week. You'll notice though that there's no fire in front of us, and unfortunately it's because the weather outside is looking a little bit gloomy, so we had to bring things indoors just so we don't get rained out. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much for signing up to become WildEarth Explorers. So throughout this experience tonight, please do send us lots of questions and we'd love to hear from you. We're going to be chatting tonight about all things conservation of cheetah and conservation of rhino here at andBeyond Phinda Private Game Reserve. And with me, I have a very special guest, Craig Sholto-Douglas, our head ecologist for andBeyond Phinda Private Game Reserve. Welcome, Craig. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks, Damen.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So I think to get things started off, Craig, would you mind giving us a bit of a background of yourself, what you do here, some of your roles and responsibilities?
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the reserve ecologist here at andBeyond Phinda. I've been here for 4 years now, and my sort of portfolio includes overseeing the research and monitoring. So we have a lot of internal and external research projects that are on the go at any given time, and I kind of oversee that and run out of 2 of our research camps. And then I'm also involved in the general reserve management, day-to-day conservation management, including some of the exciting projects we'll be talking about this evening.
Fantastic, sure. It's a full plate, but it sounds like a lot of fun, a lot of good work that we're very grateful for. Okay, so I think to get things started off, we'll start with cheetah this evening, and to get things started off, let's go have a look at a little video clip from a sighting that we had, that we shared, in fact, last year during wintertime, with a female cheetah out on the open plains. Enjoy.
Welcome back to andBeyond Phinda, everyone. Oh my word, look at this cheetah! She's chasing zebras! Albeit half-heartedly. It seems that she's in search of a mate. We've been watching her smelling against the trunks of big trees. We've been watching her checking out all the prominent termite mounds, all the kind of places where dominant male cheetah would scent mark to advertise their presence and mark their territory. And now it just seems like she's causing chaos. Look at this. Of course, with her being so small and slight of frame, the odds of her actually catching a zebra are very, very, very small indeed. They're much too big for her, much too powerful. Her body is not built for catching such big prey. But it's almost as if she's just playing. Look at how she's smelling the ground there. I wonder if another cheetah has maybe been there. And have a look at the zebra. See how they are now watching her closely. And they're not too far away from her, but they'll want to keep an eye on her, and they'll want to alarm call at her to let her know that she's been seen, that they know she's there. And they'll also want to let other animals in the area know that there's a predator here. And isn't that magnificent, that cheetah's head sticking out of the long grass and scanning her surroundings? The beautiful clear blue sky behind her.
How fantastic was that? Such a treat to get to watch a cheetah running out in the open plains like that, chasing after something, even if it wasn't really wholeheartedly. So I think to get things started, Craig, would you be able to give us a bit of information about the conservation of cheetah here at andBeyond Phinda, and I think as well touch on some of the things that are causing them to become endangered, and give us some information about their plight across Africa?
Sure, thanks, Damen. So overall cheetah throughout the world are unfortunately in a decline, wild cheetah. We only have about 7,100 wild cheetah left in the world. And Phinda, right in the beginning in 1991, alongside the introduction of lions, brought in our first cheetah. And from the get-go, because of the conservation threat the cheetah are facing, it's been andBeyond Phinda's priority predator species from a conservation point of view. And so we've really focused a lot of effort to try and really assist the cheetah population where possible. So although a lot of the global trends are negative, within Phinda we've had a really, really successful story where we've had almost 250 births since the original 11 came in the first 18 months of the reserve. And that's from 75 different litters, which is really, really awesome. And because of that success, we've been part of now what's become a meta-population strategy. Because in South Africa we have a whole lot of fenced-off reserves, and we don't have these massive expanses apart from places like the Kalahari and Kruger National Park. We have a lot of reserves though. So there's 63 reserves together in what we call the cheetah meta population. And what we do to try and manipulate the natural functioning of cheetah moving from one area to another is we manage them and we move them. And that's to make sure that the genetics are still good and to also build the numbers of the species. And what's been really successful is when that project started, which was in 2011, there were 217 cheetah in that project with the reserves and the meta population, and we're now close to 500, which is really, really exciting. And so there's been great collaborative conservation partnerships with other reserves and people like the Endangered Wildlife Trust to get these numbers into a positive growth. And as far as I know, this meta population project is the only increasing cheetah population trend that the IUCN can classify, which is amazing.
That's fantastic. Sure. I think from here, let's go and have a look at another video that we've got for you from another project that we've started here in collaboration with Ashia, to see how that's going, and then we can chat a bit more about that after we've watched that. Enjoy.
We have a very excited trip this time. We lifted off in Cape Town with a light drizzle to bring 2 cheetahs to Phinda. First we have to collect them at Kuzuko. Thanks to the good team, the crating was smooth and fast. We had another 2 hours to go to Phinda. Phinda is a very hard reserve, and it's the first time they introduce captive-born cheetah here.
Yeah, that's better.
That's
new
better.
place, new environment. So my main responsibilities are threefold, being first to ensure that the cheetahs are in mint health condition, and secondly to mitigate the risks of the translocation and to make sure that the cheetahs arrive safely on the rewilding site, and thirdly then also to minimize the aggression when bonding the cheetahs with the resident cheetahs at the end destination.
Phinda team came up with the plan to bond our 2 siblings with a resident male that knows the reserve and that maybe can teach them a bit. So yeah, we dart all 3 cheetahs and we try to wake them up together, and in the meantime we fit the collars.
So it's pretty exciting. We have hopes that the project will be a success. I think there's a lot of cheetah here as well, dominant males. So I think it will be very interesting to see how they do. And obviously we will monitor them very carefully, and at the same time, in collaboration and in partnership with Ashia, we'll be collecting data for a scientific study to gauge the potential of future introductions like this into reserves like Phinda. And yeah, we're hoping that it'll be a success, and we're very excited for the project.
So we hope they will be smart, because we need them in the meta-population. We need new genetics in the meta-population. And that's also a reason why Phinda is accepting captive-born cheetah. So fingers crossed all goes well, and we hope to see them for a very long time on Phinda. We hope they thrive and they will have many litters here on Phinda.
And we certainly hope that that female cheetah does get to produce a couple of litters to contribute to the success that Craig was telling us about earlier. Now we've got a question from Delia. Craig, Delia is wanting to know if, before we release cheetah onto the reserve, if we keep them in a safe environment prior to them then being released onto the reserve.
Thanks for the question, Delia. It's a really good one, because when this project started out and people started moving cheetah from one area to another, they were just put into a new environment and often didn't do very well, and they tried to go back to the place that they originally came from. And so now we've developed what we call a Bowmering Protocol, whereby any cheetah that's coming into a new area will go into a safe environment, a safe fenced-off enclosure, where they will have food and water, and they will spend between 2 and 6 weeks in that area, getting used to their new surroundings, getting used to the new sounds of the bush. Sometimes they can come from a very arid or dry place into a more music or wet environment. So there are a lot of factors that they have to get used to in a new area. So that's why the Bowmering period is so important, and it's also to break that homing instinct. So those cheetah are settled in their new environment rather than trying to get out of the game reserve and go back to where they originally came from.
Fantastic. And then I think, Craig, also quite interesting, just because of us now having seen the video with the cheetah from Ashia, and that, of course, happened a little while ago. And some of you may remember watching, we had a couple of sightings with those cheetah. How is that project going now, Craig? How are those cheetah doing? Obviously them coming from a captive environment, how is that a bit different to how we would normally release cheetah, and how is the project going, basically?
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a new project for us. As you've seen, the Shia cheetah are captive born, and then they go through a whole lot of phases of rewilding, where they slowly they learn how to hunt themselves, they learn how to avoid other predators like lions, and eventually they get to their release site where they go through the Bowmering process we've just spoken about before they're eventually released. And the reason why this project is so important is, although we've already spoken about the success of this meta-population and this increasing growth trend, because we are managing cheetah within this sort of framework and moving them from one reserve to another, there's a concern that you could end up getting genetic inbreeding. And so these captive-born cheetah have a completely different genetic makeup to what we have already in the meta-population. To give you an example, out of the 63 meta-population reserves, 24 of them, so almost 40%, have genetics and bloodlines that come from Phinda cheetah. So it's really, really important. So for the long-term success of cheetah in South Africa is to be able to bring in new genetics to supplement the existing genetics so that we do not get any complications that can arise from inbreeding.
Sure. Another question, Craig, coming from Ryan. She's wanting to know if when we move cheetah, when we release them, if it's done specifically when they're youngsters or sub-adults, how does that work?
Thanks for the question, Ryan. The age doesn't really seem to matter too much. Obviously, if the cubs are very, very young, it's difficult. But sub-adults, any animal around a year or older, we can very safely move with the advancement of the drugs and the vets that we work with, as well as the experience of our field teams. We can now translocate sub-adult cheetah or adults. And we can also bond different males together if one passes away, or if you're moving cheetah onto a reserve that has coalitions, you can bond two unrelated males that also increases the genetic makeup and then move them.
Very, very, very interesting, Craig. There's another question that's just come through from Joy. Joy is wanting to know if the communities that surround our reserves, if they contribute and help with the conservation projects.
Thanks, Joy. Really, really good question, and it's an important one because that we work together. Without the community relationships that we have, and none of our conservation projects would be possible. We have a really, really unique and good relationship with our neighbouring communities, and so they're actively involved. They're directly employed on the reserve. They indirectly get income from the reserve, and so all of the conservation work that happens on the reserve is not only a benefit for us, but is a benefit for our surrounding communities too. So to answer your question, yes, at Phinda and a lot of other reserves, conservation and community work hand in hand.
Fantastic. And I think just going off of the back of that, let's shift focus from here and let's go and head across. Like we said, we'll be discussing cheetah conservation tonight as well as rhinos. So we've got a little video for you as well to introduce rhino conservation here at andBeyond Phinda. Let's go take a look there.
andBeyond Phinda Private Game Reserve, we obviously focus a lot on rhinos. We have both species of white and black rhinos. We do have quite a large population of both species, and we've got a long history of rhino conservation. White rhinos were first brought back to Phinda in the early 90s when Phinda's first started, and they've been incredibly successful. Personally, I have a very close affiliation to rhinos. They're both probably my favorite species. I think that really came to the fore when we lost our first rhino here. It was actually quite gut-wrenching, you know, to find a dead rhino. You obviously feel very, very responsible for its death, and that sort of, I guess, awakened a very much a feeling of we have to look after these animals at whatever cost. South Africa's had a decade of incredible poaching. We've lost almost 10,000 rhinos. Dehorning is something that we started. It's quite a drastic sort of decision and action to take. It's something that was, I guess, a last resort. At the end of 2015, we lost 4 rhinos in 2 months, and in our sort of rhino plan, security plan, we had taken a decision that we would have certain triggers that would necessitate certain costly interventions, and dehorning was one of the triggers or one of the options, and we decided to start dehorning in early 2016 because we felt that, you know, the pressure on the animals here was too great to contain with the measures that we already had in place.
And that's of course something that we're very proud of here at andBeyond Phinda is our conservation of rhinos, and something that has allowed us to be comfortable to show them to all of you on our drives out of andBeyond Phinda. And so I think coming off of that, Craig, would you be able to give us a bit more information about how we conserve rhinos here at andBeyond Phinda, how we keep them safe from poachers? We spoke a bit about the community involvement earlier. A bit more information about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, dehorning is obviously something that can be perceived in many different ways, and it can be quite visually stimulating, the whole process, and it doesn't work in isolation. So it's a really, really effective tool, which we foresee using in the short and medium term until hopefully one day we can find another solution. And the nice thing with rhino horns is they grow back. So if we ever find another tool that we can add to the sort of toolbox that we use to protect our rhino, you know, we could leave them to grow back. So we like to believe that it's a temporary measure. But it's not just dehorning. We also need to make sure we've got really good security. That includes our surveillance, really good community relationships, really good gate access control, as well as research and monitoring. And again, and I've mentioned, is the community angle is so important. I mean, we have to be able to trust our neighboring communities, and they need to have buy-in into the rhinos, so that if there ever is someone who is looking around, or someone that they don't recognize outside of the reserve in the communities, it's in their best interest to notify us. So dehorning alone isn't the solution. It is a really effective tool, which in combination with a lot of other things that we use has really been successful here at Phinda.
Fantastic. And coming off of that, I believe it's Joe. Joe's got a question asking if, since we've started to dehorn, if we've noticed the population of rhinos, I suppose this maybe extends to other reserves as well, if with dehorning, if we've noticed that there's been a stabilizing of rhino populations.
No, not at all. We've actually, it's been really interesting. We obviously started the dehorning in the beginning of 2016, and so we've now got 5 really solid years of data where we can look back and see and try and answer some of these questions. But in 2018, we actually had our highest percentage birth rate that we've ever recorded. So we've actually seen quite an increase in the fecundity of the population, and we've seen a lot of calves born in the last few years. And so it hasn't, at least statistically, it hasn't on Phinda had any negative effects in terms of the growth of the population. If anything, it's speeded it up. But obviously there are other angles that we had to be careful of, is territorial fightings between dominant bulls. And so we made sure that we did as much homework as we could before we started, and we dehorned all the bulls together in the beginning, so that if there was a territorial dispute, you wouldn't have a mismatch of a horned animal fighting with an unhorned animal. And so, yeah, we've learned a lot in the 5 years, but we're very happy to report that we've actually seen an increase in the population growth curve.
Wonderful. And obviously with that dehorning you've spoken about, and we'll see a little video of it a little bit later on. Pete is asking if it's stressful for the rhinos, the dehorning process.
Pete, really good question, and I think any animal that is under anesthetic will have a certain amount of confusion when they wake up, and until the drugs that we use start taking effect, there is the pressure of helicopters, of ground teams in the area, which would have some level of stress. But overall, in terms of once the drugs have started taking effect and the animal's gone down and all of the external stimuli are kind of mitigated as much as possible with the earplugs and the blindfold, I think the amount of stress that overall that animal's gone through is negligible, because at the end of the day, the operation that we're doing is increasing that animal's chances of not being poached tenfold. So although there will always be, with any intervention, even for us as people, there will be some sort of level of stress, but it's mitigated as much as possible, and through a lot of experience and trial and error and usage of new drugs, we've limited that amount of stress as much as possible.
It's good to hear. And just coming off of that, Craig, I think let's go across now and have a look at the first of those videos, so that you can all get a bit of an inside view on how the dehorning process and procedure works. Enjoy.
Trying to dart a rhino is obviously a complicated affair, and I mean the main priority is the animal's welfare, always, and that's why we use an experienced, qualified vet. Mobilization itself, the vet will dart the rhino from the helicopter in the air and utilize very powerful immobilizing drugs, such as M99, one of the morphine-based drugs, that should sort of immobilize the rhino within about 10 minutes. First thing we'll do is blindfold the rhino, then the vet will get their antidote, a drug called butorphanol, which will improve the breathing and the heart rate and the blood pressure of the rhino, because those morphine-based drugs really suppress the vitals of the rhino. And then, we'll get to work on whatever we need to do with the rhino under the care and supervision of the vet. He's monitoring the rhino's vital signs all the time.
Pretty emotional stuff to watch and to witness. And there's a question that's come from Rex. And Rex is asking Craig, at what age do you start to dehorn the rhinos here?
Good question, Rex. So we normally aim at about 18 months to 2 years old for the first dehorning. That's when the horn is sort of about just under 20 centimeters of growth, but it's also at the age where it's safe to immobilize the calf with normally its mom together. When the rhinos are really small, and if you have to dart and immobilize the mom and the baby together, what can happen is the baby can go down, and then the mom under the anesthetic can maybe fall on the baby or something like that, which is obviously not what we want. So we try and wait until they're at least 18 to 24 months old. That's when we believe that there's enough horn growth to incentivize someone to come in and attempt to poach that animal. And it's also a safe age whereby there's very, very low risk of mom or calf being injured.
Sure. Another question, Craig, from Hillary. Hillary's asking, does the horn grow back after we've obviously taken the horn off?
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. And yes, and I think thankfully it does. I mean, obviously, if Rhino didn't have horn, we wouldn't have this poaching crisis that we still find ourselves in. But it is nice knowing that one day, if we do find another tool, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, whereby we can use a different combination of tools to counter the poaching threat, we could leave those rhinos and those horns would grow back. And what we've actually noticed with some of them is that have missed their second dehornings, the ones that are staying in thick valleys or areas that are quite inaccessible or have learned how to avoid the helicopters, is we've seen a very natural regrowth shape, and they actually will find a rubbing stump or a post, and they will go and actually reshape that horn. So what's really nice to know is that we've seen in the regrowth of that horn a very natural horn shape coming back, which is really nice to know.
That's great. That's great news. Great to hear. And Craig, there's a question that's come from Joy, and it's funny because you and I were actually speaking about this beforehand. Joy is wanting to know if we dehorn black and white rhinos in different ways, or if the two species, if we dehorn them differently, or is it a standard procedure?
Yeah, Joy, the standard procedure is pretty similar. The only difference is we use slightly different drugs. There's a drug that we use called butorphanol, which we use to help the white rhino breathe a little bit better once they've gone down under the anesthetic. It has a very reverse effect on black rhino, and black rhino, being a little bit more aggressive in nature, can also be a little bit more unpredictable under the drugs that we use. So the actual process of cutting off the horn and using the helicopters and the vets to immobilize the animals and then remove the horn is the same, but operationally they're quite different experiences.
I remember on my first dehorning I ever got to go along with, it was a black rhino that went down, and I remember Simon, who you guys have now seen in the videos, inviting us to come and look inside the rhino's mouth to see its teeth that we've spoken about so often, how their molar teeth cut through the twigs. And I remember looking inside and being so excited at getting to see this rhino's teeth and its tongue. And like you were saying, the breathing rate gets affected by the rhino, by the drugs. And it was almost like we'd forgotten that it had to breathe, and suddenly it exhaled, and we've got this like blast of this breath that smelled like a mulching machine. Our hair got blown back onto our heads. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. And so if we may ask Craig, let's continue, I think, to the next video rather. Let's go see a bit more about, or let's go and see another video that'll take us into a bit more detail with how the dehorning process works.
So if we're dehorning, the equipment that we need is earplugs to reduce the sound of the chainsaw. The chainsaw itself has got to be in working order. We use a grinder, horse hoof grinder to trim the horns as well. The operation itself will take sort of 30-40 minutes, and then we'll wake it up once we complete. The wake-up process is quite quick. It's an intravenous antidote which reverses the rhino completely, and so within minutes it's standing. We take great care if we, mobilizing a calf as well to make sure that they go to sleep together and they wake up together, so that there's no, they're not separated for whatever reason. We saw a dramatic decrease in incursions into the park since the dehorning. You need to get the message out that these animals don't have horns anymore, to reduce the temptation for poachers to come in. We were very grateful to get sponsorship and funding from andBeyond guests. So we've done quite a lot of dehornings with all our community leadership and traditional authority to make them aware of the crisis situation that rhinos are facing. We've only lost 9 rhinos at Phinda, which is testament to the conservation efforts of the team on the reserve. By having such a successful conservation program, we can then have animals that we can move to other parks, and there's not many places that have sort of growing populations of rhinos.
Once again, like I said earlier, I think an emotional experience is the only way to put that. And there's a question that's come through from Chevy, Craig. How does dehorning a rhino, because obviously you've done many over your time here, how does it make you feel when you have to dehorn a rhino?
Thanks, Chevy. It's something that I think because we've been involved in so often now, we may have become a little bit desensitized to the whole process. But I'll never forget the first one that I was involved in. For me, it was quite a traumatic experience. You have this animal that you've kind of grown up always dreaming of working with and being able to assist in the conservation of. And it's quite a sensory overload. You've got helicopters and chainsaws and you're removing this horn off the animal. And so initially you can be quite overcome or overpowered by emotions seeing this whole process. But as soon as you start understanding the motivation behind doing it, and understanding that by removing that horn, you are drastically increasing the chances of that animal surviving, or at least for reducing the likelihood of a poacher coming to try and kill that animal for its horn. That's kind of when the penny drops, and you realize, although it could be quite visually and audially disturbing, at the end of the day, you are helping that animal. And I think knowing that is what makes us all sleep well at night.
I remember that same black rhino, like I said earlier, it was my first time experiencing a rhino dehorning. And I remember the helicopter chasing the rhino towards us. We couldn't see whether it was a white or a black rhino, we didn't know. And the next thing, a black rhino exploded from the bush in front of us. And it was absolutely just ticked off. It was snorting and looking everywhere and charging at us, and the chopper then kind of chased it out the way, and then a second black rhino came out, and it was the one that had been darted. And the difference between the two, the one that was undrugged and normal black rhino attitude, just ready to go, and then seeing the second one that had been drugged already and was kind of teetering along with its legs locking out, and to see that rhino behaving in that kind of very almost looking incapacitated was quite an emotional experience to see, we're having to do this to a rhino in order to protect it from ourselves, basically. So I very much share your sentiments, like you were saying, your first experience. Craig, here's a very interesting question from Giraffe Girl. Giraffe Girl is wanting to know, what is the rhino's reaction when they wake up and realize they haven't got a horn anymore, if there is one?
Very interesting question, Giraffe Girl. I think, obviously, the drugs that we use, when we reverse the drugs and the rhino stands up, there's a couple of minutes where they're still quite slightly sedated and they're getting their bearings. And obviously they would notice that their horn is missing. But what else we've also noticed is that we've seen within a few minutes white rhino starting to graze right after the horn has been removed. So, I mean, I think we would be naive if we thought that they wouldn't notice that the horn's missing. But animals are adaptable, and I think they've learned to carry on without the horns, and they've adapted. And as I said, within a few minutes, you can see the animal carrying on, calling at the rest of the crash that it might have been with, or feeding very soon after the whole dehorning process.
Luna has another very important question, Craig. Luna's asking, what is the rough cost of dehorning a rhino, and how are these dehornings funded?
Thanks for the question, Luna. It's an important one, because we need to know how we can actually make this feasible. And so the costs vary, but the major costs of a dehorning are obviously using machinery like helicopters are really, really expensive. They use a lot of fuel, and then requiring really skilled, experienced wildlife vets is also quite a costly expense. And then, of course, all the ground handling team, vehicles, all the equipment we need, all of the microchips that we need, the tags and some of the tracking devices we need. And so it's very difficult, because sometimes you can find 3 or 4 rhino quite quickly, and then you can cover those expenses over a period of time. But sometimes you can fly for 3 or 4 hours without finding the right animal to dehorn. And so on average, it would probably be between 35 and 50,000 rand to do a morning of dehorning. But as I said, that varies, and those costs vary depending on how long it takes and how many you're planning to dehorn.
There's a question that's come through from Pangolin Pup, Craig. Pangolin Pup is wanting to know what your biggest conservation success has been and what we're hoping to achieve in the future.
Very aptly named.
I was going to say.
You've kind of answered the question already. But I think, to be honest, it's the pangolin project has been really, really special. I mean, it's been a locally extinct species in this part of KZN for over 40 years. So as a conservationist, to be a part of reversing a local extinction is something that's really, really special. And to start seeing females getting pregnant and giving birth to pups in the reserve is something that I don't think I'll forget in a hurry.
Yeah, unbelievably special. I know when we all saw that photograph, it was like watching your favorite soccer team or your favorite rugby team like score the World Cup winning goal or score the World Cup winning try. I think all of us were like high-fiving, and yeah, there was a ripple effect throughout the whole reserve. And Stuck in Bed has asked, what makes Phinda so special for you, Craig?
Stuck in Bed, it's a difficult question because there's so many different angles. So I think overall it's how it all fits together and how it works holistically. I think the fact that you've got all of these amazing wildlife and conservation projects that are benefiting ecologically and assisting these endangered species. So the wildlife, the care of the wildlife. And then I think how the reserve is the community are so integrally involved in the reserve and directly benefit from the reserve. I think the whole combination of this used to be old farmland 30 years ago, and now it's home to thousands of protected species. And so I think the combination of caring for the land and for the people that own the land and live here and local communities and as well as the wildlife in combination is a really unique and amazing story.
I think I 100% agree with you, Craig. I think for me as well, it's that combination of just an immense diversity across the whole reserve. From the mountainous woodlands in the south and the open grassy plains of the far south to the sand forests of the north to new species being discovered here on the reserve, species being named after us, things like the Phinda button spider, the Phinda rain frog that we've tried so desperately to try and show you on camera. Tough things to find. You can hear them calling all over the place, but to actually get one on camera is another story. And then also just the diversity around us as well, all combined with, of course, the conservation. That for me is what makes Phinda so special. And lastly, James, a comment from James saying congratulations and thank you for the fantastic job that you're doing, keeping all the animals here at andBeyond Phinda safe, keeping the species that we work with alive and growing, and for, well, not just here, I suppose, like you said, with the cheetah and with rhinos elsewhere around Southern Africa as well. So, Craig, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Thanks very much for your knowledge and for sharing with us your experiences. And I suppose there's so many questions we have about conservation that we don't get to talk about very often. So thank you for answering all of those and sharing that with us. And to all of you, thank you very much for joining in tonight. And have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you are. And we'll see you tomorrow morning on the Sunrise Safari. Cheers.